Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Today we are going to be taking a look at the damage done to Indian industry due to the unfair dumping of goods, foreign goods and the absence of a level playing field to the Indian industry and domestic produce. Dr. Jayajit, if you can just explain to our viewers exactly what the problem is and what we are going to be looking at in today's discussion.
Sure. In fact, Priya, you mentioned the word anti-dumping duty. So we need to first understand what this is.
Okay.
So we all know that India went down the path of liberalization in 1991, wherein large duties were reduced. So we had duties of 120%, 150%. They were reduced to 10%, 15%. Now, when you do that, that exposes the Indian industry to predatory pricing. So what is predatory pricing? It's that if I need to destroy the Indian industry, I'll then start selling goods at a price point which is below the total cost of manufacturing, right? And this, what it leads to is access to the Indian market and unfair competition. So if you are selling, let's say, toys at 100 rupees, I'll start selling them at 50 rupees. So I might even incur a loss, or I might just do it above my operational cost. The resultant outcome will be that you will not be able to produce and sell anything in your own market. So I'm denying market access to you. Therefore, to safeguard that, what the WTO had given a few mechanisms to protect the Indian market from such predatory pricing. These are safeguards that all countries in the world have.
All right.
One of them is anti-dumping duty. So from 1991 till roughly about August 2021, the Indian government had done detailed research in terms of which are the industries which are getting impacted. Based on that research, they had made recommendations. And most of these recommendations, 99.5% of these recommendations were accepted and implemented. These detailed research is done by an organization called DGTR, which is Directorate General of Trade Remedies under Ministry of Commerce.
Okay.
What we suddenly see from roughly around September of 2021 is that many of these recommendations by DGTR is getting rejected. What that means is that a lot of companies are shutting down because they can't compete. They can't compete not because they're not competitive, but they can't compete because there is unfair pricing happening on the other side. Because it's in a war in a different way. When you do war, you basically try to get market access and you try to get access to resources. If you can do it through through pricing differentials and pricing it at a price lower than the production price, then you have achieved the same purpose. Once the domestic industry gets wiped out, who then manufactures these goods, and then the prices are brought back to usurious levels. Let me just go back to 1815 for a moment. Is that when the Indian shipping industry was dominating global shipping and it was decimating the British ships, the British shipwrights went to the king and said, look, if you don't stop the Indian ships from being dominant, then when your Royal Navy needs help, we will not be around. We'll obviously starve to death because we can't compete with the Indian ships. So the British government at that time passed legislation which put unfair, massive amount of taxes on the Indian ships above 300, which were below 300 tons. And this was made to make sure that the British industry gets protected. Now that was protectionism. What we are talking about is plain safeguards of the Indian industry. We want a level playing field. And if that doesn't happen, we are ending up losing lots of jobs. And you would read in the newspapers that imports are going up. This is one of the key reasons why imports are actually going up in the country.
Who's rejecting the duties? The Ministry of Commerce has recommended the anti-dumping duties.
Right. So there is a process that's followed in the country where one ministry which is responsible for ensuring the growth of the industry in this country, they do this research, which is Ministry of Commerce. Then it's submitted to Ministry of Finance because larger interests of the country needs to be looked at. So if there is a geopolitical implication of certain duties being put in, then that is considered. But largely that is always cleared by Ministry of Finance. It's a check and balance that is put into place. Somehow that balance has changed, and the industry is very curious why that is happening, especially when this government and our government has come out with a clear policy on Atmanirbhar, which the entire industry is cheering.
Exactly.
Every single person, every child in fact knows the word Atmanirbhar and they're all cheering for it and rooting for it. Then why is there a different kind of a reaction from another part of the government? That is a little perplexing.
At a time where Jayajit, you said Atmanirbhar is really the slogan of the day.
Right. I think this government has done brilliant work in terms of really developing the Indian industry. If you look at the case that Mr. Gupta just mentioned about penicillin G, penicillin G is very critical for the soldiers. That's their go-to drug when they get injured. Otherwise, they'll get gangrene and so on and so forth. So it's a very important part of our defense in that sense. So just like the British example I was giving, where their shipping industry was critical to the Royal Navy in 1815, similarly, penicillin G is very important to our soldiers. If that industry gets killed, which we successfully killed 15 years back, and in fact, it was driven by PSUs. So there were 4 PSUs that were actually running that industry. We successfully killed all of those 4 PSUs.
By encouraging cheap Chinese imports.
By encouraging not just cheap, but dumping. Now, cheap is different. If the Chinese are able to produce it cheap, then they're most welcome. Because at the end of the day, the consumer should pay less, right? But if they're dumping, that is a criminal activity. That's a different issue altogether. So this whole conversation is about safeguards. We are not talking about giving unfair protection to the Indian industry. We are saying safeguard the Indian industry, give a level playing field. That's a minimal that is being asked for. Now, this issue is not just constrained to either steel or...
First finish the penicillin example. I interrupted you then.
Yeah, so, penicillin is extremely important. Now that we don't have any local manufacturers, we're importing everything. And guess from which country? Largely, it's from China.
Okay.
Now, again, that's not a problem. But when there is a issue between, the geopolitical issue that crops up, a simple stoppage of penicillin G will bring us down to the knees. Same as what happened in terms of vitamin C during the COVID situation. So we are exposed to that vulnerability when at one end we are trying to develop a short supply chain. At the other end we are saying, no, we'll not encourage that. This is conflicting, right? Again, as I said, Atmanirbharta is a brilliant step by the government, and because of which the government has also introduced another step called production-linked incentives, PLI. That was a strategy which helped us develop our car industry. It's one of the largest in the world now. We can develop an entire car indigenously in this country, which very few other nations have the capability of. Now we are doing the same thing with all other industries. We are saying if you can indigenize more and more part of your industry, we'll give you some incentives in terms of tax break, right? What we find is in many industry, the end product is under PLI, which is the production linked incentive, but the components need safeguard from dumping, but that is being denied. Now that's conflicting. We should make up our mind. Do we want a assured supply chain or we do not want that? Okay. If we need an assured supply chain, then we do need safeguards for our industry. We cannot afford to lose the thousands of jobs that Mr. Krishnamurthy has mentioned. We need to have our industry preserved so that they can provide to us when we need those goods from them. Okay. It's not just an issue of only China, it's Germany, it's South Korea, it's many other countries. And we need to make sure that we have the safeguards in place, because it's about jobs and it's about industry security, but also about security for the country. Again, going back, if we don't get vitamin C when we need it, or we don't get penicillin G when we need it, that's quite disastrous for the country. You can't make industries overnight. So if an industry dies, it takes humongous amount of effort and policy push to make sure that that industry revives. And again, in the context that this government is so focused on strengthening our industry, in creating jobs, in growing the economy, it continues to be perplexing as to why another arm of the government is not allowing these benefits to come in. Now, let me also take an example of what is protectionism. Protectionism is what US is doing, where they have increased the duties on everything coming from China at a massive level. That is not what we are doing, although that's perhaps what we should also be doing, but we're not even reaching there. All we are saying is please provide safeguards so that that our industry is not exposed to predatory pricing, to unfair pricing, and to an unlevel playing field in a manner that our industry does not get access to our own market. That is very, a deep matter of concern.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.